Second half of our lecture, picking up from where we left off, talking about the Harvard Mark IV. Huge computer, that's the main thing. These computers are so big that when they turn them on, they would dim the lights in the nearby town, right? They used as much electricity as a town. So it's a good thing they had nuclear energy in those days, right? Because kind of need it. And this is why they use a lot of energy, right? These vacuum tubes. And I don't know, you guys are probably way too young to know this, but like the TVs that we used to look at in the 1960s and for people before me in the 1950s, you'd turn the TV on and then you'd wait. And then this little light would come in the middle of the TV, and then it'd get bigger, and then it'd fill up the whole TV, right? Because the TV had to warm up. I mean, it didn't just turn on like the big wall thing that you got in your house now, which just turns on because it's a way better technology. So you had these things with wires in them, and one big tube, which was a cathode ray tube, that was the screen. But in the background to do all the electronics was tubes like this. And so these tubes we call them vacuum tubes because they would evacuate all the air out of them. And then you just have the wires in there. It's because the air, oxygen, does bad things to wires if they get hot. You know, I mean, the wires will burn and break. And so they evacuate the air from them so they don't have any oxygen in them so that they don't react. And so that they last longer. They last longer, but that's relative. They don't last forever. They sort of break, and you have to replace them all the time. So I remember we lived on a farm, but we were always calling out the TV technician. They had to come from the city to come visit us. So we had a couple of days we didn't have any TV. They'd come and he'd pull out his tools and he'd have some of these things and he'd stick them in the back, and then the TV would work again. All right, so those are vacuum tubes. Each one of those vacuum tubes is like a gate, my understanding, which is a decision part of a computer. Now, the computers that you got, even this little one that I've got here, got sort of billions of these gates in them, but no vacuum tubes, right? So we've reproduced this thing into something much smaller. The thing that we've reproduced it into is what we call an integrated circuit. And so basically these are done using drawing tools that are microscopic drawing tools that etch or a design onto a silicon wafer. Silicon wafer, I mean, it's like magic, right? I mean, you know, or I don't know if you guys are religious, like I guess you are, but you know, God likes us, right? Because he gave us this thing. And what I mean by that is silicon dioxide that's what the surface of the earth is made of. It's under your feet. It's everything is silicon dioxide. It's like the most common compound. All your mountains, most of the rock is silicon dioxide. The sand on the beach is silicon dioxide. Now, you have to have sort of special pure silicon dioxide, but it's not hard to purify rocks. You know what I mean? Sand, once you crush it up. And then you have to mix it with some other things like germanium oxide, etc. But silicon dioxide is just the most common thing ever. And that's what silicon chips are made out of. Well, you had to purify it. And as I say, you have to dope it with some other things. But the thing about it is it's a semiconductor. That is, you can change the conduction of it or how the electricity goes through it very easily by changing voltage, etc. And so that's what makes our computers work, is that on these very tiny little gates that are at the atom level, we can change a current where it's going. And so we can have a yes or a no. And that's how we do computing, right? 0 or 1, yes or no, Boolean logic. We can do that on these little chips, millions and millions of billions of these things on something so tiny. So it's at the atom level because of this beautiful compound that we've got, silicon dioxide, which is all around us. As I say, you know, cheap as dirt. Yeah, it is dirt. That's what dirt is, silicon dioxide. So that's kind of nice. Now, I say that I'm not talking out of my head on that. My first degree is in chemistry, just so you know. All right, I actually do know that stuff. So yeah, so silicon dioxide is used to make the stuff that's in the middle of this. This is not all silicon dioxide, by the way. I mean, you know, that's sort of metal, so it's conductive, and there's a plastic for an insulator. But in the middle of there is a silicon dioxide wafer, which has been etched at the atom level to give a circuit with millions of gates in it so that we can have a computer processor or memory card or whatever. And as I said, they're cheap as chips, aren't they? I mean, you know, how much processing power is that? And okay, so this is a Samsung, you know, but I mean, you know, like you can buy them for a couple hundred reals, right? Phones that'll do quite a lot of stuff. So that's kind of amazing. All right, so now it's worth mentioning that. So we got all this power. This is way more powerful than the computer that was on the rocket ship that went to the moon. So you might ask the question, well, why haven't we been to the moon since? I'll leave that open. Draw your own conclusions. But yeah, this is way more powerful than that computer. And, you know, how's that, right? So that was the problem. My understanding, that was the problem. Here we got a space guy. That was the problem is we want to get something to go around the moon and come back. That's going to take a lot of computing, right? I mean, you know, you're doing this calculus stuff soon. You'll see about differentiating rates, changing over time, etc. There's a lot of that going on when you're trying to get a rocket between here and the moon, because the moon's moving, we're moving, the rocket's moving. There's a lot of calculations to do. So that has to be done on a computer. We've got to carry that computer with us. They're so heavy. So what if we could make those computers lighter? And so there was a lot of money went into doing that. And so that actually is the money that came up with the transistor and the integrated circuit. So that a lot of that push for that is so that we could get smaller computers into spaceships, so that we could take them up there. We didn't have to burn up the whole world's worth of fuel to get them up there. And so thank you for that, because I don't think I would have my mobile phone if it wasn't for the space program, because that a lot of money went into making smaller computers. Now, Alan Turing, he's before the space program. And I'm not going to talk forever tonight. I will stop at one point, but we haven't got there yet. But Alan Turing, very smart guy. Now, when I say that, Alan Turing is a tragic individual. And what I mean by that is, look, I'm in my 60s. Alan Turing did not live till his 60s. You know, he lived till, I don't know, 40s maybe. He was his personal life was somewhat chaotic. He didn't kind of fit in. And so if you're interested in that, I recommend you live it. I mean, for me, I think it's nicer to live a nice life with your family rather than a chaotic life. But isn't it interesting that this guy who lived this very chaotic life, he gave us some very nice things, and he had a very sad life. And yeah, but genius dude. Anyway, so he was kind of a mathematical guy. And actually, we have things named after him. So we have this Turing test. The Turing test, the idea is if you can get a computer to behave in a way like a human, then we've achieved artificial intelligence. And people have been working at that for a long time. If you can write a computer program or do some bunch of stuff with some computers that can sort of beat a human at some particular sort of lot of decisions task, then we'll say that we've achieved artificial intelligence. And I think some people kind of got near to it. What Alan Turing was kind of famous for is he helped the British to beat the Germans at their code. So some of you might be interested in doing crypto, in doing computer security. So part of computer security is cryptography, which is cryptography means taking plain text and jumbling it up in a way that somebody else can't understand it. And of course, we have to do that. That's how we do all of our financial transactions when you buy things with your phone. I mean, that has to be encrypted. Otherwise, somebody's going to steal your information and go buying all this stuff and empty your bank account, right? So you don't want that to happen. So we're using a lot of encryption. So the Germans were pretty good at that encryption stuff, and they had some machine that they used to encrypt the messages that they sent from their bases to their submarines. The submarines were a big part of the war because Britain was a small island, and they didn't have enough food, and they didn't have enough machinery to face down the German army. and even the Soviets didn't. And so the United States and Canada were sending them lots of food and lots of machinery, and they'd send it by boat. And the Germans say, well, we'll just go and sink the boats. Solves that problem, right? And so the Germans didn't have a big navy. They can't just send out their battleships to go and sink these ships because they didn't have battleships. They had a couple of battleships that the British sunk, right? And so they're sending, so their tool that they used was the U-boats, which are submarines. And they would communicate with their submarines using a special encryption. And it was called the Enigma, and they had a special machine to do it. Now, they got one of these Enigma machines, but they didn't know what to do with it, right? Okay, so here's this thing. We can put some code in it. You know, what is it? Actually, they did kind of work out the thing to start with is they noticed at the end of every message, they'd have these sort of 8 characters would be the same. Why are these 8 characters the same? Every message, 8 characters the same. And they figured out, well, what do the German dudes do at the end of every message? Oh, they say Heil Hitler. So we know what those are about. Anyway, so be careful with your slogans, right? People figure out what you're talking about. So he got the Enigma thing, and he did a brute force sort of de-encryption of it. And so any of you, brute force means just using the computer power, trying every sort of combination of characters to get the answer. But he had a head start because he knew what the last things were in the message. And so he was able to break their code. And of course, when they broke the code, they kept it very secret because, you know, these guys, when they're in the war, they don't want other people to know what they're doing. But they kept it very secret, and they were able to know what the Germans were doing when they were talking to their U-boats. And that made it kind of really bad for the U-boats. They sunk a lot of U-boats, and a lot of ships got through, and they won the war. Okay, so Alan Turing was kind of a bit of a hero. I don't really want to go into World War II history too much because we'll get a lot of controversy about that. People will say that the Soviets won the war. Yeah, that's true. They won the war, but they won the war using tanks that they made and trucks that came from the United States that the Germans were trying to sink, and food that came from there as well. All right, so these guys, they kind of made one of the, after the war, they wanted to make some computers. They didn't think computers were too important, a little bit. And again, we had the problem of the census, and that came up in America. And guys like this working at universities came up with these big computers that filled up whole rooms, like the ENIAC, weighed 30 tons. Ooh, big room. And yeah, so we're kind of repeating ourselves on that. This is where I'm going to stop. We will pick up from this because this is where the topic changes. So what I've done is I've tried to do kind of quickly, and I hope in a way that makes some sense to you, is give you a bit of a sort of a broad view of history leading up to where we are in terms of computing, where we were 50 years ago, I guess. So this fellow Van Neumann, these Germans, man, there's a lot of Germans in this, right? He's a German, Van Neumann. He came up with this sort of idea of the fetch, code, fetch, decode, execute. And this is a schema for the design of a computer processor from the 1940s. That's Van Neumann's time, and we use it today. So this one's passed the test of time. This is the way all of our computers work, right? So basically, we got input, we got output, we got processing, we got memory. And that was the sort of the schema that Van Neumann came up with. So in our central processing unit, CPU is going to be on a chip. When you look underneath the hood of a laptop computer, you'll see a bunch of wires all go to, all roads lead to Rome, right? Except in a computer, are there roads in there? There's buses. We call them buses, which is sort of collections of wires that all go in the same direction. The buses all lead to the processors, and we got more than one processor in there. You got a graphics processor, and you have a central processor. The graphics processor is connected to the central processor by another bus, but the buses lead to the CPU because that's where the main processing is going on. Now, as I said, you have a graphic processor because you like to play video games, and it's really hard to make all those things move around on your screen, and you don't want to spend all your CPU time doing that. So you have a special processor to do that so that your computer game won't lag and they won't kill you, right? Is that the game you play? No. No, you play more gentle games. Well, whatever. Yeah, so the central processing unit is doing the processing. You'll see that it's got a math unit in it and a control unit. The control unit is basically saying, well, what resources do we need to solve the particular thing that we're doing right at the moment? This is all happening at, I said gigahertz, I think I said, right? So 2.3 something gigahertz per second is on the processors in these things. You know, they're running the Snapdragon or whatever it is. 2.3 gigahertz. Giga means billion. Billion. Hertz means cycles. Billions of cycles. Hertz means cycles per second. Hertz is not just cycles, it's cycles per time, per second. Billions of times we're doing this stuff every second. The control unit saying what resource to grab and what to do with it. And so then we store things in little memory, not little, they're also gigabytes of memory. We store things in the memory and then we use it, and then eventually we get an output. That's kind of where we are now. Over on the side there and below that is referencing one of the very first programming languages that was used for this. We talk about, so let's talk about those later. I'm going to kind of stop there. I think that's where I stopped with my other class. We've been going for an hour and a half time spot. I think that's kind of enough. Any questions you guys have about what we talked about? Is it enough? Or you like me to continue? Just kidding. All right, so I'm going to stop now. I got something on the chat. Oh, that's nice. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to stop there. I will stay here in the class for a few minutes if anybody